Greetings, friends. Juan here, and this is the weekly Russian-Ukraine war update for the week of December 23rd through December 29th of 2024. This is the last week of 2024. And if you want to continue receiving my weekly Russian-Ukraine war updates as we go into the year 2025, be sure to subscribe to my channel. Alrighty, let's go over what happened in this last full week of 2024. And let's start, as always, with the South Donetsk area. And this week, we are now approaching the last vestiges, the last outposts, the last battles of the battle for Kurakhove. The Russians have begun to storm the power plant directly. We actually have geolocated footage of the Russians being in what they call the administrative center. I'm guessing this is where they do paperwork instead of like actual factory work, but that type of shit. Right here, we have geolocated footage of the Russians being here. And not only that, we have geolocated footage of the Russians being in this kind of cemetery, they call it the garbage collective, or maybe the garage collective, something like that. But in any case, we have geolocated footage of the Russians being here. Some sources are saying the Ukrainians are going to be giving this all up very soon. Considering how much of a break, how the Russians were able to break through into, like, basically now battling for the center of this power plant, it's a very big possibility that by the end of next week that the Kurakhove power plant will have fallen. This was the last major stronghold for the Ukrainians holding on to Kurakhove. The residential area fell last week, and basically this was what the Ukrainians in this entire Kurakhove pocket were holding on to. They were trying to hold on to the Kurakhove power plant as much as they could, and in order to do that, they were trying to make the Russians not reach Andriivka, Constantinople, and if this falls, then there's really no point of guarding this area anymore. I predict a slow withdrawal towards these three villages, and then maybe Dachina and Uklayiki and everything, all these fields here will probably be overrun and the Ukrainians will fall back. This will help the Ukrainians because then they get out of this pocket that's been rapidly closing, and that saves them, but that means they did lose Kurakhove. But to be fair, for the Ukrainians, it's not really taking Kurakhove for the Russians is a major objective. It was the major stronghold that the Ukrainians were using to hold South Donbass, and the fall of Kurakhove. But now that Kurakhove has lost its purpose, there's no reason to hold it anymore. Besides, for propaganda purposes, like, oh, we didn't lose Kurakhove, but it's like, is PR better than the lives of your soldiers? That is the big question. But yeah, anyway, the Russians have started storming the. Things sometimes overtake you. So I wasn't expecting a direct assault, but it looks like the Ukrainians have very low troop positions here, so it looks like they're just slowly, kind of going away. So it looks like the Russians have stormed it directly. This actually has been helped because the Russians have actually been advancing in these fields beyond this road from Dolinica and then towards here. So the biggest pushes have been in these fields here. The Russians have taken these fields. They also have taken more of these fields to the south here, and so they're slowly but surely reaching the village of Yantarna here. We have these advances in the South Kurakhove, which will go through these alien UFO-looking sightings, and then they'll probably try to reach Dachina, and then from here take this kind of stronghold here, and then the Ukrainians will try to fall back to Dachina, Yantarna, but then they'll just give this all up because it's all within a pocket here, which you can see here. So the advance in the fields is basically helping the Russians storm the power plant itself. And I actually wouldn't be surprised if considering how big progress we see here, that by January 1st, which is about 3 days from now, that for the New Year's, the Russians say they've controlled Kurakhove. And that would be pretty interesting. But definitely, I'm pretty certain that by the end of next week, we'll probably see the fall of the power plant, considering they're storming it directly. Before, I thought they would try to, literally just not attack and just try to reach these two villages to make a full cauldron, but it looks like they just said, fuck it, we're just going to advance. So the battle for the Russian thermal, or for the Kurakhove power plant, has started, and the winner of that will basically control Kurakhove, and the battle for Kurakhove will be over. And then also here, the advancements in terms of towards Constantinople is still a bit ongoing. The Russians have made some slow progress towards the village of Rozolova, which is one of the things they need to take before they can attack Constantinople. They've actually taken some tree lines to the south of Rosolov, and they have continued advancing a little bit to the hills to the west of Zelenivka, which we talked about last week. So, some small progress. The Russians will continue moving through these fields towards Rosolovka, and we'll probably see the Russians, hopefully the Russians take it by the end of next week, so that once they take it, and, and the front line kind of goes like this, something like this, then they could then storm Constantinople and try to start trying to take this village. So, some small progress towards that goal. Now let's talk about Velika Novoslovka. We can now also talk about, in terms of this Kurakhove South Donetsk direction, that the Velika Novoslovka has been physically cut. All roads, all major roads that have connected Velika Novoslovka have been cut. What do I mean? Here's one road, here's the other road, and then here's the third road. And all three roads have been cut. Now, these two roads right here in the north were cut 2 weeks ago. However, this week, this last major road, this cobblestone road, has been physically cut by the Russians. We have geolocated footage of the Russians actually reaching this area and actually are holding this position. So it is now physically cut. Now, that doesn't mean they're in a full cauldron. There is a bunch of dirt roads, dirt pathways that have to go across these rivers in these fields that could continue to supply Velika Novoslovka, but it is very subpar. And I wouldn't be surprised that the Russians are, because now the Russians are basically in a position where they could start storming Velika Novoslovka, and that would definitely be something that the Russians will probably try to take sometime in January, but probably sooner rather than later. Along with this, as the Russians have advanced along these fields, this was the main piece of this is where the action's been happening this week. They've continued advancing along these fields, and they have actually finally managed to cut this road. So Velika Novoslovka is now cut off mostly. They could still escape, but there's not just some road they could follow. They have to basically move through the fields. Because of these advances, the Ukrainians gave up the village of Starozhanova. This made sense because not only are they starting to get cut off from the west, with the fall of Bladondavka, about 2 weeks ago, the Russians were able to storm this village and about to cut the Ukrainians off. So the Ukrainians fell back to Neshchikovsky and Vermivka, which are the last two suburbs of Velika Novoslovka. So Starozhanova has fallen, the Russians, and I wouldn't be surprised. And let me kind of talk. I think I explained how this battle for Velika Novoslovka is going to probably go, but right now the Russians are just kind of putting themselves in positions to storm it. The Russians will probably storm from the south here and try to take everything to the south of these rivers. So you can see there's a small part of Velika Novoslovka here, and they'll try to take it. Once they do that, and they'll be along this river, what the Russians can do here is storm the village of Nesatushki and take this small village, and then the Russians will be on this road, and then they could start moving towards this area, try to clear these fields and try to start cutting off Vermivka. Along with this, the Russians in the north from Novokomar will storm and take everything to the north of this river, and then they'll take this small part, and then they'll try to basically link up with the Russians moving here towards this river, and then from here they'll move along this river to start storming the center part of Velika Novoslovka from the north. The Russians will obviously then attack it directly from here between the two rivers. Once the Russians are about to clear out this, the Ukrainians will retreat from Vermivka, and this will fall. And then, the Russians will be along this river, and, they'll probably be along, have a position something like this. And then from here, they'll be able to storm Velika Novoslovka from multiple angles and the center part will fall. So, sorry for the schizo ramblings here, but that's kind of where I see the Velika Novoslovka battle going on here. So that is the South Donetsk direction. Things are continue culminating, and battle for Kurakhove and battle for Velika Novoslovka will probably fully end within a week or two. Definitely before Trump's inauguration. Let's now talk about the Zaporozhye direction, just some small parts here. We talked about the Ukrainian advance towards Kamyanska. However, that is now being challenged by the Russians. They're still battling for the southern part of Kamyanska, but they have not actually been able to expand from their gains last week. So there's been no gains but there's still battles going on, but some sources are saying the Russians are now doing a counterattack to try to regain what they lost from the Ukrainian push here. So We shall see if the Ukrainians will try to hold on to southern Kamyanska or if the Russians manage to bring things back to where they were. My thing, as I mentioned, is that I think this is a diversion. I think the main Ukrainian attack is going to be on the Energodar to try to retake the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. We're going to see the Ukrainians, either do a direct assault. Maybe this is a very... I don't know how complex it's going to be. Maybe they try to land here in this village from Nikopol. They could try to land in Kamyanka, and then they could try to maybe cut all roads here and try to form like a sort of bridgehead here, and then cut off in Energodar and then take it. So I don't know how advanced they're going to try to make this, or maybe they just do a small flotilla of maybe 100 people try to take this plant. And then maybe it just completely fails, like a lot of these special operations do. So I don't know how advanced, but I do think there's going to be some sort of attack here. I don't know how complex it's going to be, how much are going to be involved with this attack. But I do believe that it's going to happen. But again, I don't have a crystal ball, but that's what I'm thinking is happening. And just to claw this off, the Russians advanced a little bit north of Robotyne. I think they've captured this tree line right here or so. Yeah, the Russians are just improving their positions north of Robotyne just to continue pushing the Ukrainians back towards their position in Kurakhove. So yeah, that's the Zaporozhye direction. No changes in the Kherson direction. Looks like the Russian advance there was just like to pin the Ukrainians down. So, but there's been no changes in the Kherson direction. Alrighty, now let's talk about where there's actually been. I think this is where actually most of the big progress happened this week, which is the Pokrovsk direction. So let's talk about it. So in the Pokrovsk direction, one of the biggest things is what I call the Russian push towards the Dnieper Oblast. So we actually can see this line divides the Donetsk Oblast from the Dnieper Oblast. And so as you can see, these areas between Pokrovsk and Kurakhove, these open fields, the Russians are pushing through them to reach the Dnieper Oblast. And there is this river here, which is actually where I think, because administrative borders don't actually really correspond to good defensive positions. So there's this river here. So I think the Russians will reach the Dnieper Oblast, try to take the village of Novopolovka, and then not only will they have a position in Dnieper Oblast, but it'll be along a river, so they could defend this flank here, and that way they could use this wide flank to attack Pokrovsk from the west here. So anyway, on their adventures towards the Dnieper Oblast, the Russians have made very much big progress in these fields here. So before, what happened was the Russians were pushing south from their gains in Novotoretska. They're pushing west from their villages in Pushivki. And this week, there was a big breakthrough in the Ukrainian positions there. So first, the Russians have completely secured the village of Novoelenivka here. It was probably a double-thronged attack after the Russians were able to clear a bunch of areas around here. They were able to secure this village here. And then from here, the Russians managed to then also push to the south here, and then continue pushing south and secure the village of Ukrainka here. And so the Ukrainians fell back to the village of Yasinovo, and they're now trying to hold on to this village here. But if it does fall, and the pro-Russian sources are saying that they're trying, right now they're along this kind of reservoir, but they're going to try to storm Yazona from multiple angles and improve their situation on the flank so they can storm this little village. And again, the whole point of pushing south here is, again, to reach the village of Andriivka to cut off this Kurakhove pocket, but might not be needed anymore. Also, the Russians, one of the biggest gains here is the village of Nova Elizhnivka, this big-ass fucking name that I cannot pronounce. But anyway, we actually, we have actually geolocated footage of the Russians being here, and pro-Russian sources, they actually have captured completely this village. So we have sources showing that the Russians are in this, at least in the more eastern part of the town, but pro-Russian sources say that this entire village has been captured. So since we have geolocated footage of the Russians actually being inside this village, it wouldn't be surprised if the Russians did capture this. And the reason why this was happening is because they continued advancing along this field to the north here and managed to make the positions here a bit more untenable. And so the capture of this village is another big push towards Nadivka. And then, as you can see, we're now getting closer and closer to the Dnieper Oblast. Now, for future, when I talk about the Dnieper Oblast, I'm not going to be pronouncing the full name here because that is too long and it is too complicated for my smooth-brained mind to even talk about. So, yeah, let's. I'm going to be calling it the Dnieper Oblast from now on. Anyway, the Russians are made huge progress in this area in these fields, and now it's two pronged. The Russians will basically use their positions to like, hey, we improved some positions in the north here, or let's say, with the fall of this long village, let's say they cross and capture some of these fields here. Well, then they could then attack Yasnovo from the west here, along with from the north, and then they're not going to just attack it directly. They're going to need like, hey, we improve our positions on the flanks to such an extent that we're able to storm these villages. So we're going to probably see that happening. The Russians will continue. There's this natural river barrier to the north here, which is what the Russians will use to kind of guide themselves here. And so, we see the Russians moving along this river, and as they move along this river, the Russians will move in the center here, and then from the center, the Russians will also then move to the north, to the south here, and then move along these villages, and then just continue pushing along these villages, along these fields until they reach Andriivka, Alexandriivka, things like that. So, and also along with this, the Russians are now storming the village of Nova Vasilivka here. Some mappers are saying the Russians have entered it. We don't actually have geolocated footage of the Russians being in the village yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Russians stormed this village and took it very soon. And so I kind of talked about this already. The Russians are in this kind of these field area. Not only does this help them secure to cut off Pokrovsk from the west, it also cuts off Kurakhove from the north. And so the main goal here is to take this giant. This is a river here, the Vochka, and this red line that I drew shows off where the villages are at, or not the villages, the river is at. And so if they storm these areas, how do you say it here? If they manage to reach, this is the river. If they could reach these rivers, they could have like a 360 defense basically, and this will allow them to, then probably reach also this river that goes down here, so reach Kamar, and so this gives them a very good position to not only take all of South Donbass at that point, but then they could then start encircling Pokrovsk from the west. So that's kind of the main big push from these fields here. But they have to slowly but surely keep pushing west, and then bloom from that area. We also have the Russians pushing out from their positions in Zorya and Santoska towards the Ukrainian positions in Shamtivka, Petropavlovka, and Solonovka. The Russians actually managed to take more positions to the west of Stara Terny, and actually managed to start entering Shamtivka from the east. So they crossed this area and managed to enter some of these areas here. So we shall see if the Russians build upon that. We also have the Russians made massive progress to the west of Solntsevka, and I managed to capture more of these fields to the west here. So if the Russians could take these three villages, then they'll have a solid bridgehead on the other side of the small river that separates Zornia, Santoska, and Stara from the Ukrainian positions here. So if the Russians could continue storming Gazonovka from the north here and manage to take it, and if the Russians could take these three villages from the east here, then they could make a very big push, and because then, as you can see, there's nothing stopping the Russians from reaching Andriivka. So these pushes here threaten to cut off one of the last supply lines supplying Kurakhove. Now we're not going to talk about actually Pokrovsk itself, where the Russians have continuously made their pushes here. One of the biggest things to talk about here is that the Russians have according to pro-Russian sources, completely secured the village of Pashana. However, the only thing, we don't have a geolocated footage of them raising their flag on the most northern part of it yet. We do have geolocated footage of them being in the most defensible terrain here. This small little industrial zone in Pashana. You can see it right here. So this little mining construct here was captured by the Russians, and pro-Russian sources saying they have captured this entire village, which makes sense. Yep, and so if it is true that the Russians have captured Pashana, which even if it's not, if that is a bit optimistic, you could say, but they will definitely take it within the next day or so, and the Russians will then have positions along here. Along with this, the Russians, a lot of pro-Russian sources are also saying that they have captured the village of Vovka, and so they'll probably also take this little village here. And then from here, this gives them the Russians a very solid position to then strike towards where they could start severing one of the two highways that help support Pokrovsk here, which is this highway right here. And so this means the Russians, after the capture of Pashana and Vovka, and they'll probably also take Solonia, they'll then do some sort of dash towards this rail line here and try to take the village of Kotelnivka here. The biggest problem here is this little defensive node here. I don't know what this is supposed to be. It looks like it already got attacked because it looks like there's a bunch of like random crap here. But I think this is a little bit of a mining district or something. But this is going to be, the Russians will have to take this and Kotelnivka. So it'll be a big dash and it'll be pretty dangerous, but it will sever one of the lines supplying Pokrovsk. Anyway, along with this, the Russians are moving. They have they captured the village of Novotrud about last week. They are now advancing along this rail line, trying to reach these area right here. They are bombing the villages of Trusivska and Novoukrayinka, and along this, they have now entered the western outskirts of the village of Zolonia. And along with this, after they captured Dachna last week, the Russians will probably try to, storm Zlania from multiple angles, just so they could then have the front line be along this these rail lines here. And to do that, they'll have to capture the village Novoukrayinka and Zlania, which they'll probably take very soon. And then the front line will, if we look at the bigger picture here, then the front line will move along here, and they would have captured everything to the south here. And so this gives the Russians even better positions to storm Pokrovsk next year. And as we can see, just like with Velika Nosovka, where they, first they took Rozdolivka, then they took Novokamar, and now they're advancing the fields, and all this took about a month. Pokrovsk, which is multiple times bigger than Velika Novosovka, it's going to take a bit longer to start encircling, but same principle as well. They're going to slowly but surely, they're right now, they reached the southern part of Pokrovsk. They're going to try to outflank Minigrad from, they're going to try to split Minigrad Pokrovsk in half. They'll try to cut off Minigrad from the east here. They'll try to cut off Pokrovsk from the west. So there's multiple, the Russians are just slowly but surely improving their position so they could storm these two cities next year. So, yeah, that is the Pokrovsk direction. The Russians are making a lot of progress, especially in the areas to help them take Pokrovsk. But the Russians are making their mad dash towards the Dnieper Oblast, and it is going to be interesting to see how long it will take the Russians to reach until they reach a river, which is where Novopolovka here is. So, how long it will take for the Russians to reach here? So, let's check out if that happens. Alrighty, that is the Pokrovsk direction. Now let's talk about the Terets direction. So in the Terets direction, again, after the capture of the center of Terets about 3 weeks ago, the Russians are now just moving along the residential area, doing clear up. There is still a Ukrainian defense node of Terets right here, and they also have some positions in these Terrakons right here. But besides that, the Russians, while they're moving along the rest of the residential area, this week we saw that the Russians have captured this much of the residential area to the north of the mining here. They're slowly approaching this Terrakon right here. Also, they moved a little bit towards the mine shaft here and captured a little bit right here. So the Russians are, they're trying to clear out. They're probably going to try to clear this residential area soon. They're going to start trying to clear this residential area between this mine shaft and these Terrakons, so this area right here. And then, so slowly but surely, the Russians are making some progress in Terets. They're capturing more and more pieces of it, but, and they're preparing themselves for the last final assault on Terets. There's a lot of battles that are coming to a culmination. Kurakhove, Velika Novosolivka, Terets, Chasiv Yar. There's so much things entering their final stages that, there's going to be multiple. Ukrainians are going to take L after L in the first month or so of 2025. It's going to be a very big loss for them. Along with this, the Russians, that we saw some geolocated footage of the Russians entering the center of Sherebrentov here. However, some more sources say that offensive was pulled back and the Russians retreated back to the southern part of Sherebrenka. But in any case, the Russians are now battling for this village, and the main purpose here is to basically close this kind of mini pocket that they kind of found themselves in after they captured the central Toretsk mine. And so the main goal here probably will be to take Sheretemko and then clear out this this little small pocket here. So the Russians did advance along this rail line and start battling for this village, but it hasn't been captured yet. So yeah, that's Toretsk. Just slow progress, but it is progress that will lead to the collapse of the capture of a big strategic, a good village, or not village, a good city in Donbass. Alrighty, now let's talk about the Chasiv Yar direction. The Russians have basically did their attack note. So first, we talked about like a month or two ago where they attacked the southern part of Chasiv Yar. We saw the Russians being in these terracons. However, they were beaten back, and now they only have a small bridgehead in the south here in these fields right here. Then they attacked in the center. We saw that the Russians started battling for this factory, and they moved along this residential area to the east here and captured most of it. However, once they reached here, we saw that the Russians started battling for this factory, but then they got defeated and they had to withdraw. Now they only have positions in this eastern part of Chasiv Yar, but the center is still okay. Now the Russians are attacking in the north here, and we actually most mappers are saying that the Russians have taken what they call the Severny district and the Chasiv Yar rail station. So the Chasiv Yar rail station is right here, and this week we saw that the Russians have captured this well, we didn't see it. We don't have any geolocated footage, so maybe this could be fake, but we shall see. But anyway, a lot of mappers are saying that this entire northern part of Chasiv Yar has been captured by the Russians. If that is true, then the Russians could then continue clearing up this entire northern residential area of Chasiv Yar. And once they do that, they could then try to take this kind of small little area to the north of this lake here, try to capture this area, and this would cut off Chasiv Yar from the north. And then from here, then they will only have these roads to the south of Chasiv Yar to supply the center. However, what the Russians could do then is try to do another attack and try to recapture this kind of terracon, and then try to advance and start cutting as much as these roads as possible, so they could cut off the center of Chasiv Yar. So the battle for Chasiv Yar is ongoing. It is very bloody, and the Russians are just trying to attack in every direction that they can in order to secure themselves. Maybe the Ukrainians beat the Russians back and they'll have to retreat back to these forests like they did the other times, but it is a very much big battle going on for Chasiv Yar at the moment. Along with this, we actually some mappers are saying that the center of Grigorievka has fallen, at least this area right here. We don't have any geolocated footage, but it is something of note. It would help. I think it would help the Russians to try to clear everything to the everything right here. Just secure their flank a little bit as they advance on Chasiv Yar. So I think it's good that they do that, but I don't think it's not like I don't think they're going to continue pushing towards like Markovka or Novomakarvka here or whatever. But it does help secure the Russian northern push here in Chasiv Yar. Alrighty, that is the Chasiv Yar direction. Now let's talk about the Seversk direction. So in the Seversk direction, we actually got geolocated footage just to clarify the front line a little bit. We have so everything that requires the Russians to capture, so for example, the village of Verkhomanyanska, the village of Verkhomanyanska basically. So in order to actually start pushing towards the town of Seversk, they need to take hills, and there's a bunch of hills that give the defender the high ground. It's the hills to the north of Verkhomanyanska, to the south of Verkhomanyanska, and then also there's these hills right here between the rail lines here, and we got geolocated confirmation that the Ukrainians are still in control of these not dominant, but like these heights, which gives them the positions to basically hold back any sort of Russian offensive in this area here. So yeah, they would have. We have geolocated footage of the Ukrainians still being in these fields to the north of Rozdolovka. We have geolocated footage of them being in the north of Verkhomanyanska. And so basically the Russians are basically no better, where they have barely any progress here for the last few months, and I don't think the Russians will be making any progress here anytime soon. because the Ukrainians are still in a very strong position here, and I don't think the Russians are going to allocate forces to this direction. Where the Russians are making some small progress at the very least is in the Liman direction. And this week, the battle for Terni is still ongoing. This week, we actually have some map changes to report. The Russians have taken the eastern part of Terni. They managed to capture this ravine here and the eastern part of Terni right here. The southern part of Terni is still, and looks like in the center, is still being contested. However, the northern and eastern part is now taken. However, some sources are now coming in saying that the Ukrainians have fallen back from Terni towards Yampolovka, but which would make sense if they could then exploit this position to try to cut off the Terni and Yampolovka villages. They could then try to take this entire village directly. It'd be a good stepping stone as the Russians continue trying to clear everything on the eastern bridgehead of the Zhirbets River. But this Terni battle's been going on for about a month now, so the Ukrainians basically slow down the Russian progress here a lot. But we do see that Terni is, but looks like now that despite all the ferocious resisting, that Terni is about to fall. So we shall see if the Russians can actually take this village finally and start battling for Yampolovka. One interesting thing that the Russian Ministry of Defense has reported, but this map hasn't shown, is that the Russians crossed the Zhirbets River and managed to take the village of Ivanovka, this area right here. We don't have any geolocated footage of the Russians being here just yet, but it is something of interesting that some other mappers have said they have captured Ivanovka. So we shall see if that is if that is true. Then once Terni falls, they could secure their small little bridgehead here. But that is something that's interesting happening on the Liman direction. Alrighty, now let us go to the Kupiansk direction. In the Kupiansk direction, the Russians are making some small progress towards Borova. This week, they have completely captured the village of Zarzhadovka here. We actually had a big major armored battle going on here where the Russians did a big attack here and captured this small village. So the village of Zarosso, it has been captured, just as last week the Russians had captured the village of Lozova. And so now the Russians will secure their positions and will continue pushing from Lozova towards the village of Novokurakhove. The Russians will advance to the south from Zarossa towards Bushuslavka. And then from here, the Russians will also probably take the village of Zelinsky Hall and just continue putting the pressure towards Borova. But again, another village has fallen to the Russians in this direction, but it's still some slow progress, and the Ukrainians will definitely be able to hold on to Borova for now, but as the Russians continue making their small progress every week, it will soon culminate to them encircling Borova. And I talked about how they would do that last week on how the Russian battle for Borova would go on. Along with this, the Russians are expanding their bridgehead in Dorichia. I have no clue how this has not been eliminated yet, but it looks like the Ukrainians are stretched for manpower, and they don't have really a lot of forces to kick the Russians out of their positions in Dorichia. Because this week the Russians managed to break through to central Dorichia and captured a lot of these high-rise building areas here. These like 2-story buildings, 3-story buildings. Before the Russians were in Dorichia, but they were in this like kind of residential area here. However, this week we now have most mappers have shown that the Russians are in these kind of buildings here, and so what I think the Russians will try to do is take everything to the south of this river right here. So they'll try to take everything here, and then once they have this bridgehead, a lot of sources are saying they're going to try to storm the village of Zapototina, which has the biggest hill in this area. And then if they could try to take Zapototinia, they can then take a bunch of these forests here, and then they could have a very solid bridgehead here. Now you might be wondering, okay, let's say they do that. Well, what's the point here? The main point here is that then they could start moving to the south here and start battling for Kupiansk on the other side, because Kupiansk is divided in half by the Osko River. So we shall see if the Russians could continue. But but this does make them that if they do have this bridgehead, then to supply this bridgehead, they'll have to cross a river, and the Ukrainians could target their pontoon bridges and such. So it is a bit of a big gamble, but it is something that the Russians, they're trying to maybe make themselves in a position to storm, to when they do reach Kupiansk, that they could take all of it, not just half of it. Alrighty, there's been no changes in the Kharkov direction, and let's now finish off with the Kursk direction. Just a little bit of stuff happening in Kursk. We have geolocated footage that the Russians have completely captured the village of Krutyn-Lanovko here, and and since they have captured this village, now the Russians will probably continue storming, probably try to storm these two villages and start trying to reach this rail line and cut off the northern pincer of the Ukrainian Kursk salient here. But this village of Kurakhove has been captured. We also have the Russians raising their flags in the village of Cherkasky Konovko, so we definitely know for certain that this village was captured by the Russians. And the Russians still have some positions across the Pesky River in Krutulivko and Gudovo here. So we shall see, but they have not expanded them this week. So yeah, the Russians made some small progress in Kursk, but we are now right now the Russians' main focus is to cut off the northern salient, and then the only thing the Ukrainians will have left is Suchka, and then they'll have basically Suchka and its suburbs, and then that'll be where the final battle for Kursk happens. Alrighty, that is this week's video on the war in Ukraine. Hopefully you guys enjoyed my commentary. Hope you guys enjoyed my thoughts, what's been happening. You guys got updated. And yeah, be sure to subscribe to my channel to continue seeing these weekly Russian-Ukraine war updates. Be sure to like this video, comment your thoughts, not just on what happened in this video, but what you think is going to happen in this war. Yeah, be sure to share this video around. So aim high and wander on.